Welcome back to the Death Row and Executions channel. My name is Paco Rivera and I do presentations on an execution that will happen soon, including a story on what got the death row inmate sentenced to death. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates and more death row news. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. Also check out my other channel here on YouTube called The Maximum Sentence, where I cover a recent crime and conviction. There will also be a link for that. This past July 30th, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a 14th death warrant for the 14th death row inmate to be put to death in that state this year. That warrant set an execution date for 74-year-old Harold Gene Lucas, who was convicted and sentenced to death in 1977 for the 1976 murder of his 16-year-old girlfriend who had recently broken up with him, Anthia Jill Piper, known fondly to everyone as Jill. Lucas was 24 years old at the time, so there was an 8-year difference between them. In this day and age, a man of that age dating a minor of her age might get someone in serious trouble. But in 1976, 50 years ago, it wasn't being taken that seriously in most societies, it seems. Jill Piper was born in December of the year 1959. So it's a bit difficult to now think of her as a 16-year-old girl, but that was her age in 1976. If she were still alive today, she would be 66 years old. According to Jill's obituary, she had 3 brothers, or has 3 brothers, because I think they are all still alive. One brother was Lester, known as Buck, who was married to a woman named Cindy. Buck and Cindy had arrived on the scene on the night of the murder, and I will discuss a bit more about what they had to say about what they saw that night. Jill's other 2 brothers were David Jr., who was 13 years old at the time, and another brother named James. Jill's father was David Sr., who has since passed away, and her mother is Eleanor Piper, who is now 86 years old. David Sr. and Eleanor had relocated from Bonita Springs, Florida to Enterprise, Alabama. And according to the family, Eleanor, at age 86, plans to travel to Florida from Alabama to witness the execution of the man who killed her 16-year-old daughter 50 years ago. Harold Gene Lucas was born in October of the year 1951. He has been on death row in Florida for 50 years. He is now 74 years old. And that's how old he will still be if Florida carries out his execution on September 1st of this year. But like I said, in 1976, when he went on a shooting spree in the front yard of Jill's home in Bonita Springs, he was 24 years old. Now, according to reports, Harold Lucas and Jill Piper first met 4 years before the murder, which means that she was only 12 years old when they met. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were dating, but there was some kind of friendly interaction between them over the years, and at some point later, they began dating. One report states that Jill and Lucas began dating when she was 13 years old, but I'm not sure how accurate that report is. That same report states that Jill had later dropped out of high school. According to Jill's mom, Jill cared for people. She wanted to help them. According to a friend, Jill was full of fun and full of life. According to one report, and I quote, "The teen who dropped out of school in the 7th grade used to take care of neighborhood drunks, sometimes giving them milk and honey to cure the ills of a night of drinking. When she wasn't watching her kid brother or helping elderly neighbors carry groceries, she'd work at the family restaurant." Jill's grandfather was a man named Lester Piper who began an attraction in Florida with his brother Bill in the year 1936 in the Bonita Springs area. It was called Everglades Reptile Gardens, later also known as the Everglades Wonder Gardens. They had alligators and snakes on display. The family that took over in later years had added exotic birds and other creatures of the wild. And I believe it remains an attraction still operated by the family to this day. So it would seem that Jill did not come from an impoverished, dysfunctional family. I'm a bit surprised that the family allowed Jill to drop out of high school so young, if that is true, or maintain a romantic relationship with a man that was 8 years older than her, especially one who was known to abuse drugs and was an alcoholic. Bonita Springs is a small town between Naples and Fort Myers on the Gulf side of Florida, and that is where Jill was born, grew up, and went to school. Jill had been described as a bit of a tomboy who had about as many male friends as she had female friends. In the weeks leading up to the murder of Jill Piper, the relationship between her and Lucas had become extremely rocky. There was a lot of heavy arguing back and forth, and Jill finally let Lucas know that she didn't want to have anything more to do with him. But he continued hounding and stalking Jill, and even though he was warned not to go to her family's property about a week before she was murdered, he arrived there again anyway, and he was arrested for trespassing. But he wasn't held for very long. About a week after he was arrested and shortly thereafter released, the incident began on a Friday the 13th in August, when Jill and her friends encountered Lucas several times that day at various locations around town, including at a gas station convenience store. And he had once again threatened to kill her. Jill was with two friends, a girl named Terry Rice, who was 17 years old, and a boy named Richard Bird Jr., who was 19. Shortly before midnight, Jill's two friends agreed to accompany her back to her house and help her if she needed protection from Lucas. Jill drove, and she had her own car. They arrived back at her house shortly after midnight, so now Saturday, August 14th, 1976. According to reports, they had also armed themselves with some guns from the Piper household. At some point, all three were in the front yard of the house getting ready to move Jill's car to another location and then walk back to the house. Jill had made it a habit during the previous weeks to hide the car somewhere else so that it looks as if she wasn't home. Now, here I will quote directly from testimony given by Jill's friend, Terry Rice. Remember, Jill and her two friends were in the front yard by the driveway. Terry testified, "I saw somebody standing at the side of the house with a gun. I then saw that it was Gene." Gene is how they referred to Harold Gene Lucas. "I saw Gene shoot it, and I saw Jill fall. I heard Jill crying and screaming. I heard her say, 'Gene, why are you doing this? I haven't done anything to you.'" Terry Rice said that she and Richard Bird Jr. then ran into the house to escape the shooting, and they called police from a telephone in the master bedroom. She then saw Lucas enter the bedroom and shoot Richard. Terry said she then ran into the bathroom and Lucas followed her, and there was a struggle between them in the bathroom. Terry said she pleaded with Lucas to not shoot her and that he told her, "I am not going to shoot you." But after he walked away from the bathroom, he turned around and shot her anyway. Terry would later spend a month in the hospital after surgery for a bullet that had gone into her hip. Richard Byrd had also been taken to a hospital after being shot in the abdomen, but he recovered much quicker and he was released. Both Terry and Richard would also later testify that they had heard Jill begging for her life and the shots that had followed. Lucas had shot Jill Piper 7 times, including a fatal shot to the back of her head, and she was found dead on the ground of her front yard when police arrived at 12:48 in the morning. Lucas had fled in a blue Ford Pinto. Even though reports indicate that Richard and Terry were armed with guns, it appears that the surprise attack from Lucas prevented them from retrieving those weapons. Strangely, it is not clear in any of the reports why Jill's parents and family were not home at that time of the night. Jill's brother, Lester Piper, who everyone knew as Buck, was called on the phone alerting him about the situation at his parents' home, and he drove over there with his wife, Cindy. Buck said that when he got there were police cars and yellow tape all around the place, and he insisted on going over to his sister's body, and they allowed him. When they told him not to touch her, he ignored those demands from police and cradled his sister's body in his arms anyway and told her that he loves her. Buck's wife, Cindy Piper, had said during an interview, "It was like a horror scene. I mean, by the time we got there, she was dead." Now, some reports state that Lucas was arrested the following day. Those reports are incorrect. Jill was killed on a Saturday, and I see reports that on Tuesday, 3 days later, as the family had completed funeral and burial services for Jill, the manhunt was ongoing. They were still looking for him. And furthermore, authorities had been afraid that he may show up at the funeral and begin shooting people there. So authorities were present throughout the services. Lucas was in fact captured and arrested a week after the murder, after he was spotted at a McDonald's in the city of Naples. The case went to trial the following year in 1977. Harold Lucas had maintained that he has no memory of the situation that night because he was very high on drugs and extremely intoxicated from drinking. And his attorneys attempted to use that as a defense against premeditation, which would remove the option of the death penalty. As it turns out, about 2 hours before the shootings, just 2 hours before, Harold Lucas had been stopped by a police officer for a minor traffic violation, and that officer testified that there was no indication of Lucas being under the influence at that time. The jury didn't care to hear about Lucas's drug and alcohol problems, and he was ultimately convicted and sentenced to death. He was also sentenced to 30 years in prison twice for the attempted murders of Terry Rice and Richard Byrd Jr. There are news reports appearing over the next 5 decades about Jill's family, especially her mom and dad, and their frustrations with how long it was taking for the killer to be executed. As it turns out, Lucas's defense team was successful with one appeal after the other, and the death sentence was overturned 5 times over the years, which is the reason carrying out the death sentence has been delayed. However, he was resentenced to death each time, following a new sentencing hearing. Jill Piper's father, David Sr., will not get to see the upcoming execution. He passed away before that was to happen. But, as I mentioned earlier, the family intends to bring Jill's 86-year-old mother from Alabama to Florida to witness the execution. Please go ahead and hit the subscribe button for more of these death row and upcoming execution stories so that you're alerted when the next one comes out. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates and more death row news. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. My name is Paco Rivera. Thank you for watching. Take care and bye for now.